And welcome back, everyone, to Brain Swap, where today we are talking about NEETs and Hikikimori.
Oh, that sounds neat.
Yeah, not that kind of neat. We're talking about NEET.
NEET.
What does that stand for?
That stands for not in employment, education, or training.
Interesting. So that's going to be, sorry guys, that's kind of, gosh, if you're not in any of those, not in education, not in employment, not in training, what are you doing?
Well, a whole lot of nothing. What is it? The idle hands are the devil's workshop.
There we go.
I'm sure those hands get busy doing something, but it's probably not something productive for society or too many people. Although it could be. It could be. I mean, a person could be not in employment, education, or training. They might be creating something like an artist.
That would be employment, right? That would be a form of employment.
Once they get paid for the art.
Yeah, I guess.
But I mean, that's doing something. That's not the same as the NEET concept.
So what is Hikikimori?
Hikikimori is more of a recluse.
Okay.
More of a shut-in, bordering on the edge of agoraphobia, or fear of socializing with others, which I think is much more possible in this day and age than it has been in the past. In the past, a person could be a hermit, but that was kind of unusual because you needed other people to survive, and you needed interaction to have those people to survive with. But in the day of being able to order everything off the internet, stay in your house, receive your packages when the person's gone, you could go for days without seeing a person if you wanted to.
Much less food.
And you could order food, you could order, I mean, there have been some cases where people have set up auto payments from their accounts and have died.
Wow.
Nobody knows because they don't have friends over, and they're sadly their corpses stay there for months and months until eventually it gets so bad smell wise somebody says something, or somebody finally says, hey, they're not getting their mail, or
right. And certainly Hikikimori in the Japanese sense is the encompasses that, and probably also the slightly less extreme version.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was taking it to the extreme level.
Sure.
But the internet culture makes it easier to socialize without real life interaction, being face to face, seeing people's responses, and developing the sort of the ideas of how things kind of exchange in a real time environment. It with text or email or any of those, you don't have that dynamic of a real sense of timing and action. Now with online gaming, you at least get a little bit of interaction. You can hear people, you can talk and stuff, but it's, of course, people have their game face on. They're not there talking about, I had a really tough time today with my boss. Or I suppose they are, but it's not as easy to have like a real kind of heart-to-heart conversation in the middle of a game.
Exactly. And so to bring this back to the anime topic, the most obvious example would be, of course, Welcome to the NHK, which is an anime series about a shut-in, Hikikimori, who then sort of his adventures. We won't get into spoilers or anything there. But it's interesting seeing, because obviously there being a Japanese word for it shows that this is a trend, if you will.
This is not just something passing. There's a word for it.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's common is probably not the best word for it, but it happens
enough to the point where it's
people
been
talk
observed.
about it. Exactly.
Culture.
And so, in heck, they made an anime series about somebody who's Hikikimori. So the question becomes, this has been identified as a Japanese phenomenon, and the backstory to that is, Japan being a country that prizes employment, that prizes being a productive member of society, much more so than more individualistic Western countries. Having people who have retreated from that and aren't taking part in that makes it a more remarkable thing. So Japanese talk show is going to talk about it a little bit more than they would over here because it's a little more unusual.
And with a culture that stays more homogenous, and the idea that you will conform early on and choose your career path. If you haven't chosen your career path or your education leading to your career path, you kind of fall through the cracks in some sense. And if you haven't got that burning passion to do such and such a career, you're left kind of in limbo. And here in the US, we have a little bit more flexibility in those stages where a person can go off for several years, find themselves, or join a job that they might decide that they don't want to follow that career path, or they could do something. There's limbo stages, but having a culture where you need to conform and get in early on in the process means that there's not that incubation stage.
That's a great point. I think it's one of the reasons why it's so notable in Japan, is because if you don't slot yourself into that point past college, you become NEET. You get into this state, and it's very hard to break out of, especially like you say, if you don't know where you're going. So I think the phenomenon is most pronounced amongst those early 20s, mid 20s population that have kind of fallen off the way.
And when you think about it, not in employment, education, or training. Education and training sound very similar, but I think it lends itself more to here's a trade, or here's a professional career that you're going to go to.
Well, and it also gets to the point that there's a difference between the educational system and going out and taking a class at night. So if you're a NEET, then you're not even pursuing you're at least, to your earlier point, you're not pursuing a structured craft or career. You may be drawing manga because you want to do manga all day, and it hasn't really worked out yet, and so you're technically a NEET for that reason. But then that gets more to the Hikikimori side of it, of people who aren't doing any of that. They're more or less just sitting at home, watching anime or what have you.
And that can become a perpetuating cycle too. The more you stay alone, the more comfortable you are alone, and the more comfortable you are alone, the less comfortable you are in unusual social engagements, and so it can kind of.
And as Dee points out in the chat room, that in Tokyo and those various cities, you have so much infrastructure. You have a convenience store on every street corner, and in a heavily urbanized country, where so many people in Japan live in Tokyo or Kyoto, or live in these very dense cities, that it's a lot easier to, and again, where you're not necessarily talking about the extreme shut-ins, but somebody who they go down to the convenience store once a day, buy their food, and come back home.
Yeah, and it's sort of a weird paradox that in a more and more crowded society, you have a higher degree of anonymity, because there's so many people that the amount of time they spend with you can be greatly diminished. So they may not even know you, even though you're in their neighborhood or all around there all the time.
There was a great book published a few years ago called, I believe, A Year of Living Biblically, where a guy tried to follow every single rule and law in the Bible. Not cutting your hair, you name it, just every single one. And bit of a spoiler alert, he goes through all of this, and he's trying to sort of understand that and understand the reasons behind all of this, and really trying to kind of grok it. And at the end of the book, the neighbor across the hall passes away, and he didn't even notice it until he got there, and he'd been passing her in the hall and just completely ignoring her all year. And he realized the one chief law is love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
It is the one thing he was ignoring in following all of these rules. Because it was so, it's so easy to get distracted by those everyday things.
Yeah, it's true. And to some degree, I can see people worrying, don't talk to strangers, like they're told when they're a little kid. But getting to know your neighbors is really kind of a step towards civilization and culture. And had I not, I probably wouldn't have found all sorts of wonderful anime.
Well, yeah, exactly.
And so you know, I can see that easily happening. Large apartment building, you see somebody, you pass in the hall, you just sort of nod that you know them.
Exactly.
And that's about the extent of it.
Yeah, well, it's tough. I mean, like you say, especially in this kind of situation, there's a lot. There are so many different ways to not interact. You can just pass people by. But you know, like you say, having those neighbors, and especially, I mean, physically proximate neighbors have the advantage that if you go out of town, they can pick up your mail, or they can, you know,
make sure that the package dropped on your doorstep isn't tampered with.
Exactly.
Thank you, Ariel and Gnome.
Totally. Now, folks in the chat room are pointing out the kind of difference between the Japanese and the American sort of view on this, because what's significant here is that, and I think it's one of the important things we're pointing out here is that pulling away from society for some period of time isn't crazy.
No, it can help you reset. Sometimes society just twists us into such knots that we just need some time to even out and relax a little bit and separate ourselves from the kind of crazy rat race that we get caught up in.
Absolutely. And we've all, and I wouldn't say we've all, but many people have had times in their lives where they just need to, for an extended period, you know, pull back and, you know, not go to all the parties, not go to all the get-togethers, and just kind of, you know, recharge. But with, you know, we're talking about folks who do this for years, who just spend huge amounts of time just not reaching out to anyone.
Well, once a battery is charged full, you don't want to keep it on the charger forever. It'll shorten its life.
And that's really what the Hikikimori thing is all about, is this idea that once you spend enough time in that environment or situation, it becomes normal.
Yeah.
You know, I just don't go out. I'm
used to it. I do it every day. It's the way it is.
Right. And so it becomes harder and harder to work those muscles of interacting with people.
Yeah, and it does take work, especially when you're encountering somebody that you've never met and you don't know how to react to their particular approach on life. They may have some strange way of saying things or doing things, or a very strong opinion, and you don't know whether, well, if I express a contrary opinion, I don't want to get into conflict. I don't know what to do, and although sometimes it's good to not know what to do and just do it anyways, because you learn.
Yeah.
And they may not have even realized there's another opinion other than theirs that exists in the world.
Well, and the other reason why this is relevant to us specifically is that this phenomenon seems particularly strong with geeks and otaku, because we do tend to be a bit more socially awkward. We do tend to be more intellectual, i.e. more, you know, living our lives up here in our head, as opposed to, you know, mountain climbing or what have you. So it's a lot easier for us to say, okay, we're just not, you know, I have my anime, I have my manga, I have my stuff to do. I'm not going to engage.
Because it takes work and it can be painful.
Yeah. But
that in itself can create its own sort of pain. The pain of loneliness and isolation is still present. So it's funny for anybody who's seen Welcome to the NHK. We can see how the characters struggle with loneliness and agoraphobia, and how having a sense of purpose in their life gives them something to strive for that can pull them out of sort of their normal habits where they've worn their trail of daily patterns. They can break those cycles and start something new.
And so how does he find a purpose in his life?
Well,
practically speaking.
Initially, well, having a friend, well,
well, yeah.
Having a friend who, well, he didn't even know it was a friend initially. Having a neighbor who was playing an annoying song over and over and over and over again. Not so much that it was annoying once, but hearing it over and over and over again became so grating on his nerves. That's
this song, maybe?
I had this as a ringtone for a little while.
There we go. Yeah, I love that song. Once.
That is great.
I will play that song once, and then I will stop playing it.
So his neighbor had that on a loop, and fell asleep with that on pretty much every day. But he was in school. He was doing something. He was going to school and didn't realize how thin the walls were. And,
but then what broke him out of that more generally?
Well, the idea of the ambition. Well, it's a series of things. I'm not sure how many spoilers I should throw in there, but having a purpose and a goal. And mild annoyance is one thing, but having a goal, something to strive for.
In other words.
A project.
Okay.
And not to release any spoilers, but everybody has their projects and goals that they strive for, and some of them are external, and some of them are internal. Like, for example, a parent may want a child to go into a particular career. They may strive and push everything upon this kid to learn, say, for example, medicine. But if the child goes through and just does it to please their parents, at some point they're going to be unhappy that they haven't pleased themselves, and they need their own goals. They need the ownership of their own project, and it's great when they coincide, but sometimes they don't. And so we can see this play out in the storyline, and having other people's goals imposed on you is one thing, but not having any goals of your own is a tricky problem that our character runs into. But so he starts with little goals but if you haven't played the goal setting game in your life, then when you start to make goals, you can make them too grandiose to achieve, and they have to be somewhat achievable, and so it's a growing process that it goes through.
It's like so many things. If you want to start exercising, a good way to do it is to say, I'm going to walk to the end of the street and walk back today. That's all I'm going to do.
Bite-sized pieces.
Right. And then once I find I can do that, then it's not that hard to extend that to 2 blocks and move on from there. So it is absolutely something that you've got to pace yourself. As you said. But I find that interesting, the idea of finding a concrete thing to do, or something where you can break down into real world actions, right? Something you do. And by real world action, I can mean sending an email, but something where there is a physical thing. You have to go over to the computer and do this typing or whatever. I think that can absolutely help to break you out of that funk.
Yeah, definitely. And it doesn't always have to be a super big step, but the important thing is once you make a step, you can grow comfortable with that, and then expand your boundaries by going a little bit outside your comfort range. You don't have to jump completely into discomfort and alien worlds, but just pressing outside of your comfort zone can open up doors you never knew existed.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am a creator.
So getting back to the questions that we haven't really answered, do we have this phenomenon in America? More, in any way like it is in Japan?
Well,
I would say we do.
I'd say we do, and as was mentioned here earlier, and it doesn't necessarily just have to be anime. People can get off into their own little worlds with all sorts of things. Collections, trains, books, puzzles, knitting. But some of these activities are more social than others.
Yeah, true.
Some people knit alone, but they're knitting circles. Distance runners. It's lonely if you're a distance runner. But if you find other people to run with, you may be able to get a similar pace or meet up before or after. So I think this does occur in the U.S. quite a bit, and more so with our internet age and the way that people are communicating.
Yeah. Now, Murderous Johnny asks a very interesting question in the chat room. I want to hit this. Do hoarders count as a kind of NEET?
Oh, that's a good question.
As in people who hoard lots of stuff.
Well, they could be employed, so they could
Sure.
afford all the stuff,
Yeah,
or they could be not employed and still get the stuff through other means.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be something of an expense to hoard it. I mean, I hoard cardboard boxes.
There we go. I can see the folks who have, you know, every issue of the New York Times going back to 1958.
Ah, yes, I remember all those TV guides.
Yeah, right.
And stacks of National Geographics.
So that's an interesting question. So do you think, so how is it similar and how is it different? You think hoarding compared to this?
I think it's similar in that it's a pattern behavior, and it's the kind of thing that initially is not too bad, but can become almost pathological if it's left to taken to its extent.
Well, and I think also I think hoarding would naturally result in being more of a shut-in, because you're changing your environment into something that becomes harder and harder to get out of, to change. You're creating these patterns in yourself.
I would definitely see some overlapping tendencies. Sometimes people who are hoarding things realize that it's not the ideal environment to bring people over, which causes them not to invite people over.
Exactly.
Which means that when people do come over, they're shocked and they don't come over as often. And because they don't come over as often, this person's alone more and more and more, and so the process perpetuates. So some of those habits take on a life of their own, and until the owner of the habit realizes the effects of their behavior, they can't break out of that pattern. And sometimes it's just they need help breaking those. Sometimes they want to break out of those patterns, but they've become so ritualistic that it's hard to remove them from that. And there's some overlaps with obsessive compulsive disorder, which I could see being easier to get that disorder if you don't have as much interaction with other folks, because
somebody can come over to your desk and move your mouse, but it's going to happen every week. Absolutely. As my mom said, she was a psych major in college. She said, there's always a reason why everyone does everything they do, right? People don't act randomly. They are, that person is collecting National Geographic for some psychological reason.
There's a purpose. We don't know what it was or what it is. It may not even be a good purpose.
Right.
It's a purpose.
It's always there somewhere, very deep. And
my grandfather had a bunch of these, and I just can't seem to get rid of them. I don't read them, but I collect them because he collected them.
A great example, Stephen Covey talks about this. I think it was Covey. Somebody in one of those books. His wife always insisted that they buy, I think it was GE brand appliances. And this was just a law. And they would talk back and forth, but all these things, and she couldn't even articulate it. She just, GE appliances.
GE.
And so then they had a period in their marriage where they were able to take these long walks every evening and just chat for like an hour. And on 5 months into this, they got on the subject, and turns out her father was an appliance salesman, and he had all these different kinds of appliances that he sold. And every night when he'd come back, and he would literally walk around selling appliances. He was, door-to-door salesman.
Wow.
And he would come home, and the one thing she would do as a little girl is she would massage his feet when he got home. So he would get home, and he would talk to her as she was massaging his feet. And they had some really tough times as a family. And GE was the one company that stuck by them and gave them, all the flexibility that they could possibly ask for, and was just really the best client. So while his wife was in that most, open, intimate in the best sense, time with her father, talked very, very, he's just pouring out to his daughter. She's listening to her daddy. All of that gets into her when she's 8 years old.
So she may not even realize what's formulating these concepts in her head. It's got to be G. I mean, they're the ones.
So that behavior gets set, and there's no way you, again, even as the person, you can't necessarily unravel that all every time.
And even more so, not being able to articulate it, but having that disposition shows how deep it is set, and that it's not as conscious a decision on her part.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, but it's there. So yeah, it's why it's important to be not just rational, but to be graceful about these activities, about people who are like this. You know, they're doing this because it feeds some psychological need. Maybe it may be very rational, but you got to be aware this is, they're doing this to help themselves, and without it, it's going to be very painful. It may be better for them in the long run, but it's not something you can say, well, just stop doing that. Just don't do it.
It's impossible to change somebody by that approach, but really, if they see it as a problem, they may want to make a change. Until they own it, there's no reason for them to change. So if they have a desire to, you can nurture that desire.
Sure.
And you can help them. And in fact, needs helping needs.
Yeah.
Is a common thing. And Hikikimori. Okay, we know we've got this sort of fear of public interaction, and we will deal with it little by little. What progress are we making? And it becomes sort of a group therapy and somewhat accountability.
Yeah. Well, and one of the best ways of handling this too is by, like we were saying earlier, take little steps, but you can go out once a month to a meeting of people who do things you like. Find an anime club, find a board game club, whatever, makerspace, and understand you're probably not going to find the group that you want to hang out with the first time, right? You're gonna go and they're gonna be like, no, never. This is why I didn't want to go here, and that's normal. You go and. The goal is not to find your soulmates the first time. The goal is to go hang out, have fun, watch, Naruto or whatever, and then you can go home and never go back again if you don't want to. But at least you found some things, and you never know. I would do things at Katsucon and go up there and have events, and then some guy came up afterwards and asked questions. And we ended up, going out and having breakfast together, and next thing you know, we're doing a podcast
together.
Right. And that was not because I expected to build relationships out of that, but because I was there and he was there, it happened.
Yeah.
I generally don't build relationships at anime conventions. It's just not. It doesn't happen.
It's not a common thing, but. But it's just taking the initiative sometimes that starts the snowball rolling down the hill, and then it gets its own momentum.
Yeah.
Find a NEET club. Yeah. NEETs unite. I was like the
antisocial meeting.
I wanted to join the antisocial network, but I wouldn't be a part of it.
Exactly. Who goes to meetings of an antisocial group? Now. Some folks have pointed out in the chat room the difference between sort of introversion and extroversion, and the difference between people who are shut-ins in a more pathological sense, and those who genuinely don't like going out and meeting and greeting and getting together with people, right? Extroverts versus introverts. That's actually one of the interesting things I think that makes this different in America than in Japan, because especially in America, we so in culture reward extroversion and do not reward introversion. And extroversion and introversion are just two poles. Some people are some people are very one way or the other, and it depends on where you are on that spectrum. And so being somebody who and the way I like to look at it is, when you're an extrovert, if you go to a party, at the end of the party, you feel energized.
Yeah.
If you're an introvert, you go to a party and you feel drained.
Yeah.
but you come home and spend 3 hours in your bedroom and you're charged up and you can talk to people and you can interact.
Where the extrovert spends 3 hours at home alone and they're running out of energy because they want a social action.
Exactly.
They want to get into, they charge their batteries in different ways.
Yeah. So if you're an introvert, that does not make you a shut-in or a Hikikimori or a NEET. And
being shy doesn't necessarily make that either.
Exactly.
There are people who are, I found people who are extroverts, but they're shy for the initial stages of an interaction. They'll be shy, but once you get to know them, oh, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
And so I think part of that is different.
And there are sort of high energy extroverts and low energy extroverts, right? So there are the classic salesperson extrovert. Hi, how are you? Shake your hand. And then there is sort of the nurturing grandmother extrovert, right? The person, stereotypical, who is who goes to like 5 clubs a week and is baking cookies for people and is doing all this, but isn't in your face about it. They just have their hands in lots of different environments. Just like there are sort of high and low energy introverts. There are these sort of hard charging general pattern types who will talk to you for 3 seconds because they have something to tell you and then move on because they don't care about you. They care about getting this thing done. And so they get a billion things done in a day, but never talk to anyone. And then there's the the low energy sort of software engineer types where just put me in a cubicle and let me type all day and never talk to me, never put me in a meeting, just let me do that, and we're good.
It's funny, these different personality types kind of lend themselves to different career positions more.
Yeah.
So the person who's sort of a self-starter but introverted can sit and do all sorts of programming, work on spreadsheets, do all sorts of fantastic things. But if you put them in a highly collaborative, interactive environment, they slow down their productivity because it's not their wheelhouse, so to speak. And so it's interesting to see how that plays out. And one of the things that I find fascinating about the whole NEET and Hikikimori dynamic is the ability for people to find their inner voice, more of their true nature, and to some degree their calling for what really moves them. And this was a fantastic show for that. And there's other references though throughout anime besides Welcome to the NHK and
Pet Girl Sakuraso has a character who only interacts with everyone else through the internet. He actually lives in a dorm and nobody ever sees him. He just communicates through text messages and pops on screens and such.
Well, that's a common theme on anime. Now that I think about it, the social network, the never seen train man.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so it certainly is out there. But yeah, so point being, what can we do to assuming that we are not necessarily NEETs or Hikikimori, we may tend towards that. We may have that in our wheelhouse, as you were saying, as a possibility. But we socialize. Let's assume that we all can do that. Let's say we identify somebody. Oh yeah,
Watamote. Yeah, that's fantastic. Oh, I love that. That one was a riot.
So let's say you see somebody who you identify as an introvert, as a NEET, as somebody who is definitely shut in, who is not communicating with somebody. What's the best way to help them?
I'd say being there for them is one thing. It's a good start, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll initiate interaction.
Right.
But if you do have a chance to talk with them, ask them questions.
Yeah.
Because questions, people like to talk about what they know about, and NEETs are going to know about themselves more than what they're studying in school, no, what they're training, no.
Right.
Yeah, ask them about themselves. So what are you doing with your time? What do you find enjoyable? Where do you think that will lead you if you keep doing that? Or what is, and just asking questions kind of draws them into the pattern of thinking outside of the patterns that they usually think in. Because it's an external perspective that kind of causes them to reflect back on themselves when they may not have been reflecting on kind of themselves from the third person perspective. And sometimes that can jumpstart the thoughts of, oh yeah, okay. But at the same time, some people are not NEETs because it's a choice. Sometimes it's a tricky situation. Like, hey, I didn't get into the school that I wanted to. My job.
I got laid off.
Got
6
laid
months
off.
ago.
I've got to figure out something. I don't want to do this thing, or my training wasn't working.
And sometimes just them saying that can be enough to help them think about other ways of behaving. But also, I think it's helpful to
network. Oh, you need a job.
Man, the chat room is evil. That's awesome.
Which one?
I
gotta read up.
So no, but I think like you said, I think asking questions is crucial because, like you say, you may find out that they are in a situation where it's like, dude, do what you can. I mean, obviously, this is not something where you're in a funk. This is because just life has been, whacking you, and you'll get up eventually. But never mind, right? That happens too. Now, also, I think you can invite them to things.
Give them more animated.
Well, and I want to get back to that one actually. If you have an anime club, if you have stuff, invite them to come, and invite them more than once. This is something people don't understand, I think, a lot about people like that.
Some people won't come unless they're invited, and you have to be clear that you are specifically inviting them and you want them there.
And they will often not do it the first time.
Sometimes you have to ask them a few times.
Right, and the date may come and go, and you have to invite them again, and eventually they'll actually do it. Because again, it's hard. If you're out of practice, it can be very difficult to do that.
Right. And they might not even be into anime. I mean,
sure.
With these characteristics, there may be something else that interests them, and that's where talking with them, they may be really into Victorian romance novels or some other area of fantasy or diversion from some of the more painful aspects of their life. So if you can find out what they're interested in, then you might be able to invite them to something that they might come out to more.
Sure. So. And that's an important point. Don't just invite them to one thing necessarily.
Yeah.
Again, it might just not be their thing, or it might be, and this is something that a lot of geeks don't recognize, is that they might like an anime club, they might not like your anime club, right? And it's nothing against you. It could be that the setting, the scenario, any number of things of that might
there
just
was
not
this
be
person there that just always used to annoy me.
Oh, I have stories. So try different things. Hey, I'm heading out to Rock Creek Park to hike around and wander around. Do you want to join me? Do that. Lots of different things you can invite them to, and try different stuff to get them involved with something. And again, expect some pushback.
Fisher, eat snow then. Eat snow, just not the yellow snow.
Okay.
Let's see. What about polar folks who are in? Let's say you're working in McMurdo Station in the South Pole, and there's not a lot of chance to get out and interact with people.
I don't know.
What do you do?
I don't know.
I'm a research scientist stuck at the pole, and there's 5 people, and they're driving me nuts. I don't want to be near them.
Can't help you there. Sorry. Now, getting back to the earlier point about just getting more anime, I think there's some wisdom there. If somebody is shut in and is just only focusing on one thing, so that's a way of supporting people. That's a way of telling somebody, look, this is what's helping you right now. Let me help you. And it can reach out to them, and that is being a friend to them. That is that support that we're talking about. And you suggest out and you reach out to people and help them, then they're more willing to listen to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a reciprocity thing.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes one thing I found is not everybody acts obnoxious or grumpy because of the people they're around. It may be the circumstances that they're in.
Sure. And
you're just catching the sentiment. You're not the object of frustration. You're just there kind of catching it. They may be frustrated about several other things. So being able to separate oneself from some of the harder problems that people have interacting, you can approach it from their perspective and say, hey, okay, I realize you're upset about something, and acknowledge how they feel.
And this gets to something else that we tend to. Watamote deals with this a lot, actually, is this idea that when you're not used to these sorts of social interactions, and again, we're not suggesting that you're somebody. We're not suggesting that you're somebody that does not have any social interaction. We're talking about somebody who just don't have you're not out there a lot. We tend to build idealized versions of these interactions in our mind, and we tend to really build up these ideas of how it's going to work, and then when it doesn't match that reality, it's crushing. And that's part, I think, of dealing with people.
Sorry, I'm laughing about Watch the Thing. That's perfect for being in the water. The movie The Thing takes place in the Sorry. It was just I wasn't laughing. The humor was not directed at. It was completely unrelated to what you were talking about.
Yeah.
So didn't mean to interrupt.
So. Yeah, I think that's certainly a thing. Anyway, so yes, I think we pretty well covered it. Like we said, I think this does happen here in America. It has a different twist than what you see over in Japan. I think, like you were saying, really good ways of helping that is to interact with folks, help them as much as you can, and then kindly draw them into other social interactions.
One of the best cures I found for loneliness is go find somebody else who's lonely and say hello.
Yep.
And see where it goes from there.
There we go. Absolutely. And actually, this is another thing I wanted to pull this back into. If you're an introvert, you're not going to have 20 close friends. Another way that we tend to do these sort of idealized versions of interactions, and we think that, okay, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be part of this club, and I'm going to get out there and do this thing, and I'm going to have all these friends, and it's going to be great, and we're going to go out and party and so forth. If you're an introvert, you may never get you may be wired to have a few very close friends, and then other acquaintances and you'll milder friends, if you will, but you're not going to have necessarily that same interaction.
Definitely. Yeah.
We're all wired differently.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I think that covers it. So again, thank you all very much for joining us, especially in the chat room, talking with everyone. So next week, we'll be talking about a rather different topic. We'll ask, have you sought out the original version of an anime, the original manga or novel or video game, and what was it like? Ooh. So when you actually went to the source, what happened? How is it different?
Trace it to the source.
Yeah. And what experiences did you have? Was the source better? Was the source different? Did you not like the anime after going back to the source? What happened?
Oh, wow.
And, should you go back to the source? Is that a good thing?
Was the source more raw?
And
Not
what
as refined.
happens? Yeah. So yeah, that'll be our topic for next week. As always, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you then.